If you own a website, run an online store, or manage a booking page for your business, I want you to pause and ask yourself one question before this video even starts. Do you actually know what your cookie banner is doing? Because a company just paid over $1 million for getting that one thing wrong. Most cybersecurity content aimed at business owners talks about firewalls, antivirus software, and stopping hackers. Today, I'm not talking about any of that. Today, I want to talk about a mistake that has nothing to do with hackers at all, a mistake so common that it's probably sitting quietly on thousands of small business websites right now, including possibly yours. And one company just found out the hard way that this mistake can cost over $1 million. Welcome to Cyber Safety Brief, where we explain simple cybersecurity advice for everyday Americans, including the small business owners and website operators watching this. This video is based on authentic, legal, and publicly available cybersecurity and privacy information. Everything here is for awareness and protection only. Nothing in this video involves hacking, unauthorized access, or anything illegal. This is a breakdown of a real regulatory case and a practical warning for anyone who runs a website. Here's what happened, in plain terms. A digital ticketing platform, one used by schools across the country to sell tickets for sporting events, plays, and dances, was investigated by California's privacy regulator. Investigators found that the platform required visitors to accept tracking technologies just to use the site, without offering a genuine, functional way to say no. That tracking data was then used to power targeted advertising. The result was a fine of $1.1 million, along with a legal requirement to change how the company operates going forward. Now, here's why I think every website owner watching this needs to actually pay attention, not just skim past it. This wasn't a massive tech corporation with an army of lawyers who somehow made a wild, careless error. This was a fairly ordinary business, the kind that looks a lot like thousands of small and mid-sized platforms operating across the country right now. In my opinion, that's exactly what makes this case so important. It's not a warning about giant tech companies. It's a warning about the exact kind of setup a huge number of everyday businesses are running without a second thought. Before we go further, I want to set the stage a little more, because I think context matters here. Over the last few years, privacy law in the United States has gone from something only large corporations worried about to something that touches almost any website collecting visitor information, no matter how small. A lot of business owners built their websites years ago, added a few plugins, connected an email marketing tool, maybe an analytics dashboard, and never thought about it again. That setup used to be completely fine. It increasingly isn't. And this case is a clear example of what happens when the law catches up faster than a business does. Let's go through this properly, because I think there are real practical lessons here that go far beyond just this one case. Point 1. Your cookie banner might be a legal liability, not just a formality. Here's what most website owners get completely wrong, in my opinion. A cookie or tracking consent banner is often treated as a box to check off during website setup. You install a plugin, it generates a banner, you glance at it once, and you move on to running your actual business. Nobody thinks of it as a genuine legal document, but that's exactly what it is. What actually got this company in trouble wasn't the existence of tracking. Plenty of businesses use tracking tools legally every single day. The problem was that visitors weren't given a real, working option to decline. If your banner has only one obvious button, like Accept, and the option to reject or customize is hidden, tiny, or barely functional, you're not offering a genuine choice. You're offering the appearance of one. The way I look at it, a lot of businesses fall into this trap simply because default settings in website builders and plugins are designed to maximize consent, not to maximize genuine compliance. Nobody sets out to trick visitors. It's just that the default setup quietly nudges everyone toward clicking accept, and business owners rarely go back to check whether the reject option actually works the way it's supposed to. A practical, safe step you can take today, if you run any kind of website, is to go visit your own site as if you were a first-time customer. Actually click through your own cookie banner. Try to say no to tracking, see what happens. Does it work smoothly, or does it feel confusing, buried, or broken? If it feels off to you as the owner, it almost certainly feels that way to your visitors too, and that gap is exactly where legal risk starts to grow. Here's a small but telling detail worth thinking about. Many website builders and plugins ship with a default banner that technically includes a reject option, but that option is styled as plain gray text tucked into a corner, while the accept button is large, colorful, and impossible to miss. In my opinion, that kind of design choice is where a lot of businesses unintentionally cross the line from offering a real choice to simply performing one. Nobody sat down and decided to manipulate visitors. It's just the default template, left untouched. But regulators don't evaluate intent as much as they evaluate outcome, and the outcome of a banner like that is the same either way. Most people never realize they had another option at all. Point 2. You don't have to be a big company to be investigated. This is the point I think a lot of small business owners get wrong, and honestly, it's the most important mindset shift in this entire video. There's a very common assumption that privacy regulators only go after massive corporations, the kind with billions in revenue and household names. This case says otherwise. The platform involved here wasn't a giant tech company. It was a business serving a specific practical niche, ticketing for school events, and it still became the subject of a full investigation and a 7-figure fine. In my opinion, this should change how small and mid-sized business owners think about privacy compliance entirely. It's not something you can safely ignore just because you're small. If your website has enough visitors, and if it's touching personal data in a state with an active privacy law and an active regulator, size alone does not protect you. What matters is how your website actually behaves, not how big your company is. What most business owners underestimate is how much regulators can access. Investigations like this often happen after visible complaints, automated compliance sweeps, or media attention. They don't require some elaborate covert operation. If your website's consent flow is genuinely broken and enough people notice, that alone can be the starting point for scrutiny. Here's a real practical action item. If you run a business website, don't wait for a complaint or investigation to find out something is wrong. Once a year, do a basic self-audit. List every third-party tool on your website that could be collecting visitor data, things like analytics tools, advertising pixels, embedded video players, and chat widgets. Many business owners genuinely don't know how many of these are quietly running in the background because they were added by a developer years ago and simply never revisited. Let me know in the comments if you run a website and have ever actually checked what third-party tracking tools are installed on it. I have a feeling a lot of people watching this have never looked. I also want to address a specific assumption I hear a lot from small business owners, which is something like, "My website barely gets any traffic, so surely nobody's paying attention to it." In my opinion, that logic misunderstands how these investigations typically start. It's rarely about traffic volume alone. It's often triggered by a single visitor complaint, a routine compliance sweep across an industry, or even a competitor flagging something. A low-traffic website with a broken consent flow isn't necessarily safer than a high-traffic one. It's just less likely to be the first one noticed, which is a very different thing from being protected. Point 3. The fine was only half the punishment. The operational changes were the real wake-up call. Here's something a lot of people miss when they hear a headline number like $1.1 million. They assume that's the whole story, the company paid, and that's the end of it. But that's not actually what happened. Alongside the fine, the company was legally required to change its business practices, meaning its approach to tracking and consent had to be genuinely fixed, not just paid off and forgotten. In my opinion, this is actually the more important outcome for business owners to focus on, because it tells you something regulators clearly care about beyond just punishment. They want the underlying behavior to change. If you're a business owner, that should tell you that fixing your consent flow now, proactively, is a far better position to be in than being forced to fix it later under a legal order, with a fine attached and your business practices under public scrutiny. What I personally think is that most business owners would happily fix an issue like this if they simply knew about it in advance. The real problem isn't willful negligence in most cases, It's a lack of awareness that this level of enforcement was even a realistic possibility for a business their size. A useful defensive habit here is treating privacy compliance the same way you treat a basic annual business checkup, not a one-time setup task. Set a recurring reminder, maybe once or twice a year, to revisit your privacy policy, your cookie banner, and your data collection practices. Laws and enforcement patterns shift over time, and what was considered acceptable a few years ago isn't necessarily acceptable now. I think it's also worth pointing out why regulators tend to favor this approach of pairing a fine with required changes, rather than just a financial penalty on its own. A fine alone can quietly become a line item, something a large enough company simply absorbs and moves past without changing anything meaningful. But a legally binding requirement to fix the underlying practice removes that option entirely. The business can't just pay and continue as before. In my opinion, this is actually good news for consumers in the long run because it means these cases tend to produce real, lasting improvements rather than a one-time headline that fades a week later. Point 4. Being connected to trusted institutions, like schools, raises the stakes, not lowers them. I think this point deserves special attention for any business owner whose platform touches families, children, healthcare, or other sensitive contexts. This particular platform was embedded into school systems, meaning families trusted it simply because their child's school directed them there. That trust changes the entire risk equation. In my opinion, if your business operates in a space where people are trusting you because of an institution behind you, a school, a healthcare provider, a community organization, you carry a higher responsibility, not a lower one, to get privacy right. People are not scrutinizing your privacy practices in these situations because they've already extended trust to the institution that pointed them your way. That means the burden falls entirely on you to honor that trust properly. The way I see it, this is exactly why cases like this tend to attract more regulatory attention than an equivalent issue on a completely unrelated commercial website. When children or families are indirectly involved, scrutiny naturally increases, and rightly so. If your business touches these kinds of trusted relationships in any way, treating your privacy setup as a low priority is a much riskier bet than it might seem. A concrete step here, if this applies to your business, is to specifically flag your consent and data practices for a closer review, even if you consider your business small or low risk otherwise. It's worth the extra hour of your time to genuinely understand what data you're collecting from users and how clearly you're communicating that to them, especially if children or family accounts are anywhere in the picture. This also extends to how you talk about your own business publicly. If your marketing materials, your about page, or your onboarding emails lean on words like family-friendly, trusted by schools, or community-focused, understand that you are actively inviting a higher level of trust from your visitors, whether you intend to or not. In my opinion, that kind of language is completely fine to use and often true, but it comes with an implicit promise attached. The moment your actual data practices fall short of that promise, the gap between what you're saying and what you're doing becomes exactly the kind of thing a regulator, a journalist, or simply a frustrated parent can point to. I would also like to know your opinion here. Do you think businesses connected to schools and families should be held to a higher privacy standard than typical commercial websites, or should the rules be exactly the same across the board? I'm curious how people watching this actually feel about that. Point 5. This case is a preview, not an isolated incident. Here's the bigger picture I want every website owner watching this to walk away with. This case did not happen in isolation. Privacy enforcement across the country has been steadily increasing, and it's increasingly targeting mid-sized, everyday platforms rather than only the largest tech companies. Booking systems, ticketing platforms, loyalty programs, local service websites. These are exactly the kinds of businesses that historically assumed they were too small or too ordinary to attract this kind of attention. In my opinion, that assumption is becoming outdated fast as more states pass and refine their own privacy laws, and as regulators gain more experience and confidence enforcing them. Cases like this one are likely to become far more common, not less. What used to fly under the radar simply because tracking practices were so normalized across the internet is now being actively examined, and business owners who assume they're too small to matter are taking on a real, growing risk. If you run a website of any kind, I don't think the answer here is panic. I think the answer is treating basic privacy compliance the same way you'd treat basic financial record keeping. A normal, ongoing part of running a business responsibly, not an afterthought you deal with only if someone complains. There's one more thing I want to leave business owners with, because I think it's genuinely reassuring rather than alarming. Fixing most of what we've talked about today does not require hiring an expensive lawyer or overhauling your entire website. In a lot of cases, it comes down to small, specific fixes. Making your reject option as visible as your accept option, actually listing what third-party tools are running on your site, and updating your privacy policy so it plainly describes what you collect and why. None of that requires deep technical skill. It requires attention and a willingness to look at your own website the way a first-time visitor would, rather than the way you're used to seeing it as the owner. If this video helped you think differently about your own website's privacy setup, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Cyber Safety Brief. We regularly walk through real cases like this one in plain language, specifically so business owners and everyday users alike can actually understand what's at stake. So here's what this case really comes down to for anyone running a website. A trusted everyday platform serving schools and families was found requiring tracking without offering a genuine way to opt out and using that data for targeted advertising. It cost the company over $1 million and forced real operational changes. It wasn't a hack, it was a consent problem, hiding in plain sight in a setup that looks a lot like what many small and mid-sized businesses are running right now without a second thought. In my opinion, the real lesson here isn't about this one platform at all. It's a reminder that privacy compliance isn't just a concern for giant tech companies. It's a basic operational responsibility for anyone collecting visitor data, regardless of business size. Taking a genuine look at your own cookie banner, auditing the third-party tools quietly running on your site, and treating privacy as an ongoing habit rather than a one-time setup task costs you far less than a regulatory investigation ever would. Stay alert, stay informed, and stay safe online. Before you go, comment below and tell me, have you ever actually gone back and checked what your own website's cookie banner is really doing, or is this the first time you're thinking about it?